All right. Well, first, I'd like to welcome my guest to the Optimistic American. I'm here with a very good friend of mine, Fife Symington. Fife and I have known one another for a long time, at least a long time for me. I think I was about 26 years old when I first met Fife Symington. He actually was in the development business at that point in time, and I was running for the city council. Later, he became governor. He has an amazing history. You'll love hearing about his family. But really, one of the keys to this story is that we're talking about how we were once political adversaries, at least to a degree. Potentially, I was thinking of running for governor back in the 1990s, and he was governor. That always makes for a little bit of a tension between between friends. But nonetheless, with Fife and I, we have really built a friendship since then. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that as well. Welcome, Fife. How are you today?
Yeah, nice to be here, Paul. You're great to have me on your show. I'm really happy to be here, and I want you to know that you are not only probably the finest mayor Phoenix has had in my lifetime. I recognized you early as the biggest political threat I could have possibly faced.
Well, thank you. I don't know that was true.
Not in a bad sense, but just in terms of your ability and charm and intellect. You are a very formidable person, and but also you got a big heart, and I've always respected you.
Well, I appreciate it, and I can say the same back for you as governor. I enjoyed. We did work together on some issues. We were able to get some things done, but you accomplished a tremendous amount while you were there. Some things of which I'm getting the benefit of today. I have grandkids who are in the charter school system.
Oh, do you?
And the charter school system, mine is they're in Basis and Great Hearts. And both of those two schools are just doing an outstanding job with them. I came from legislation that you were engaged with.
Yeah, isn't it amazing how charter schools have taken off?
It is amazing.
Yeah, it started with a simple notion that what we needed was a little competition in the public school arena, and they weren't established to hurt other schools. They were there to sort of create a competitive environment. There's nothing that shapes you up faster than an opponent that's fit and coming at you, right?
I guess, maybe.
Yeah.
All right, so here's the key question for the Optimistic American, and maybe something that you could give me your comments on. Our goal is to try to create a space for optimism. We see a media today that is kind of hell-bent on destroying the American brand, both sides. I enjoyed watching Fox a couple of weeks ago when they made the comment that CNN was that they hated America, and I thought that they were half right. CNN seems to hate half of America, but it seems like Fox hates the other half.
Right.
And in the meantime, they're just kind of bombarding the American public with these negative messages. I'd just like to know your thoughts on whether or not optimism is needed, whether or not there should be a space for it, maybe more importantly, whether or not you believe still kind of in the American brand.
Well, that's an easy answer. I do believe in the American brand, and I've always believed that the world belongs to the optimists. I mean, I just, the old Scottish proverb about you might as well be happy while you're living, for you're a long time dead. It seems so
I like that.
Fundamental, and optimism means that you're ready to get up and go for it, and open new doors and look at new things. And it's like you as an entrepreneur, what you've accomplished in your life. I mean, if that comes from probably a deep-seated optimism that you have driving you, that was perhaps instilled in you by your family growing up. But
you started several businesses.
Yeah.
Optimism had to be key for each one of them.
Yeah, I've had a few of them, and some successful and some not so successful.
Oh, that's true with anybody in business. And there's
Sure.
also weeks that you're not successful and weeks that you are. I always say I'm going to be a success.
Yeah.
I just don't know which decade.
Yeah.
Might be this decade, might be the next decade.
Yeah.
So,
But I agree with you. I think there needs to be, we need to figure out ways to generate more of an optimistic spirit. I particularly have noticed that amongst our young. Today there's a lot of pessimism amongst the young. Pandemic has caused a fair amount of that. And so I work on that to try to talk to the young folks about what life is all about and the challenges life presents, and that there's always the sun's coming up every day, and you need to kind of embrace the future, not go negative about everything.
We talked a little bit about yours and my issue. It's funny, you and Senator McCain both kind of fell into the same category for me. I fought a lot with Senator McCain while I was mayor as well. So maybe it's, my dad used to say, if you start thinking that all these people are jerks around you, maybe you're the jerk. But, so maybe I fell into that category.
Well,
but,
John always liked you.
yeah, well, he beat me up.
Well, he did that to a lot of people,
Oh.
but he was a great guy. He really liked you, really respected you.
You know what was amazing to me is that Senator McCain, when we built the friendship, it happened literally. I was standing in a line. He was walking out of the building. He and I had fought for years. As he walked by me, he looked at my eyes. I kind of looked at his. It wasn't a nice moment. And finally, he turned back around and he came back and he said, "Hey," he said, "look, I was in a prisoner of war camp." He says, "I only had friends and I had enemies." And he said, "I just counted you as an enemy." He says, "I just want you to know I treated you worse than I should have, and I'm sorry." Wayne Howard was standing next to me. He said, "That did not just happen." And Senator McCain turned and walked away. But we built this friendship.
Yeah,
and
that's a great story.
I made a decision. Hey, I was going to spend time making him a friend, trying to spend time helping him on endeavors that he was involved with, but also trying to listen to the gifts that he had to offer. I remember during one of his presidential campaigns, I got a chance to listen to one of his stories, and he told me parts of the story that he said wasn't in his book, but he talked about while he was being tortured, he had gotten really sick, and he was slated to go home. They had made a decision they were going to send him back home. Of course, his dad was the admiral inside the Navy. Obviously, he was a kind of a prize prisoner. But he said that he made a decision that he didn't want to go because he wasn't the next in line to go. So he said they took him back out, beat him up. I think they broke his arms again or something along that line. And he said when he got back to his cell, he took his pajama bottoms, he tied himself up inside the small 5-foot cell, and he was basically going to try to kill himself. And he said the guy next to him began to tap on the floor, kept tapping. So he finally got down and he went down and he tapped back. He said all night long, this individual tapped to him. Well, I got to meet that individual with him and listen to him talk about Senator McCain and his time in the prisoner of war camp. And I look back on it and I think about the wasted time I had in politics fighting with him. And missing out on the gifts that he brought to my life just in that one story, and being able to listen and understand where he was coming from. I feel much the same way with you. I feel that there are many gifts I was able to get in listening to your stories about you and your family and the things that took place. And again, I'm hoping that we can talk about some of those here today.
John had just an invincible spirit,
didn't he?
He really did. And he had great courage in the face of really imminent death. And I'll never forget, we were flying into Tucson in the State King Air in the summer, and Deb Gullett and was on the plane, his chief of staff, and me and a couple others and stuff. And as we were on final approach, a dust devil hit the airplane and put us over on our wing. And I mean, it was really, it almost turned us over on our back, And John screams, "Oh, we're going to die. We're all going to die." He was saying it with a great sense of humor, and not everybody thought it was very funny. But he just was fierce in the face of danger.
Just amazing.
And very few people in our generation would have survived what he survived.
You served in Vietnam as well, is that right?
Yeah, well, I was actually based at Udorn, Thailand, which was the western part of the war, where we were fighting in Laos, basically, trying to interdict the soldiers that come through the jungle on the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
What a period of time, huh?
Yeah, it was in 1970. It was the height of the war, Do
you think the country was as divided then maybe as it is today?
Oh, I think that the country actually was more divided then than it is today. Maybe it's hidden because people sort of vent in social media so much, and it creates this aura, that it's bigger than it is. But back in the 1960s, heck, it was really something. I mean, the SDS, and it's when I was a freshman at Harvard. They took over the buildings, and I remember they almost captured Robert McNamara, or the Hasty Pudding. I was sort of on the outskirts of that group, watching it, and I had to carry my Air Force uniform in a paper bag across campus. They still had ROTC, and I used to sort of sneak across campus, worried about getting ambushed. So it was really very hot environment, direct threats, that type of stuff.
There's a polling group that has created a very compelling argument that we are not nearly as divided as you're hearing on nightly news. In fact, they make the argument from polling that literally about 80% of the public wants to set partisan politics aside. Not that they aren't a Republican or they're not a Democrat, but they compartmentalize it. They say, okay, well, this is a piece of my life. It's not my entire life. And that really only about 20% of the people are really, really divided. But the difference today is two things. One, the media's pick sides, but two, social marketing. You go into your social marketing, and it only takes 2 or 3 people to get into a fight on some post that you put up, and you begin to recognize, okay.
I don't know where these people get the time to do that. Do you?
No, it's amazing. It is very interesting.
Yeah, it really is. Like, there's so many other things I want to spend my time on rather than getting into an argument on the internet.
So, if you don't mind, give me a little of the history of your family. I really, I think it's a fascinating story all the way back, I believe, to the Frick family and others. But give my guests a little understanding of your family and how long you've been engaged.
Well, on my mother's side of the family, it was all the Frick. I call it all my Frick cousins. But
who were the Fricks?
Henry Clay Frick was from Pittsburgh. He was an industrialist, and he, as a young man, borrowed about $10,000 from a guy called, I think it was Thomas Mellon at those days, to buy coke mines around Westmoreland County and outside of Pittsburgh. And
coke isn't the coke that we think about today.
No, coke was sort of what you need to make steel. So anyway, great-grandfather made a fortune at a very early age and became partners with Andrew Carnegie, and the two of them built basically what ended up eventually being as U.S. Steel. And it was Carnegie Frick Steel Works and stuff like that. And then J.P. Morgan came in because great-grandfather and Andrew Carnegie had a hell of a fight. They just hated each other.
It had to do over, if I recall, a mining strike or something along that line.
Well, it wasn't so much the strike, the Homestead Steel strike, as it was that Carnegie tried to buy him out at a really low value and cheat on the deal. And great-grandfather won that battle and never spoke to Carnegie again after he won the battle. And then J.P. Morgan bought them both out and turned around and made my great-grandfather the head of U.S. Steel. And they shut Carnegie out because they didn't like him. So they played pretty rough in those days, but they play rough in these days too. But so anyway, his greatest contribution, I think, to the country is the Frick Collection, which is a wonderful art collection in New York City, which used to be the Frick Home at 1 East 70th Street. It's considered to be one of the finest art museums, really, in the world. And he had a great eye. He bought a lot of wonderful paintings and stuff. So
now, also the Symingtons, I believe, go back to the Civil War, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. On the Symington side, my ancestor was a Confederate. They called him the Major. He was General Pickett's chief of staff. And you may remember your Civil War history of Pickett's charge up Cemetery Ridge. Most of them were killed. Well, he basically led that charge up Cemetery Ridge and was on horseback. He was a cavalry officer. And he survived miraculously because his horse was shot out from underneath him and fell on top of him and protected him from all the cannonballs that the Yankees were aiming down the ridge at the charging force. So he survived. And then when it came time to surrender at Appomattox, he's in there with, you can see his picture, he's in there with Lee and all the guys with their swords. And they had to take the loyalty oath to the Union. And he refused to do that and went to Heidelberg, Germany, and studied in Germany and got his law degree. And then General Grant gave him a pardon, and he came back to the United States and settled in Baltimore. So he was quite a character.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
So I love your name, J. Fife Symington III.
Yeah, it sounds really stuffy, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does sound really stuffy, yeah.
Yeah, they used to hang that around me, and you would have hung that around me.
I probably would have.
I could see the ads now.
But before I hang those around you, I also remember the first time I met you. The first time I met you where we really talked was during the Martin Luther King effort. We were trying to implement the Martin Luther King Day.
Right.
So here you are. You come from that family. You're pretty conservative, I would guess. You're certainly a Republican at the time. and you became one of the leaders in the movement to try to make certain we had the Martin Luther King Day. What was going on?
Well, you remember that Ev Meekum basically called a halt to it, and I thought that was a great mistake. I mean, discrimination of any kind is just not my playbook. So I thought it was also terrible for our state's reputation to be a state that said no to the Martin Luther King holiday. So just, all of us, you and we all got together and we changed the dynamic and cleaned that mess up. It needed to be cleaned up. The interesting thing is that I think we're the only state in the union that had a statewide plebiscite vote and voted in the Martin Luther King holiday.
Right.
Everything else, all the other states did it by executive decree and, that route. So we can be very proud that we put ourselves on the map firmly in support of the Martin Luther King holiday.
Okay, so you then run in a Republican primary. Did Evan Meekum run in that
Yeah,
primary?
he was in.
Already out?
Yeah, he was. Boy, that was something else. That was a heck of a primary. I had a 5-way primary, and I had Sam Steiger. Do you remember Sam?
I do. Yes.
Yeah, Acid Tongue Sam and Ev Meekum. Gosh, I was on the campaign trail with those guys for more months than I care to remember.
And what I also recall is you didn't back down on your stance on the Martin Luther King Day. In fact, you didn't back down on your opposition to Evan Meekum and what he had done to the state during that time.
I remember I got in trouble in the very beginning because I said publicly, I said the one thing that Evan Meekum is a bully and he needs to be punched in the nose. I think that was my line.
Yeah.
So whenever I went out into the out on the political hustings, there'd always be somebody in the audience that was a Meekumite, and they used to nail me. How could you say something like that about our former governor and everything? And I'd just kind of blow it off.
Was it hard leaving? Was it hard leaving the development business to go into government, or was that just something that you always had an ambition to do?
No, I didn't have the ambition to do it. It was an interesting evolution. I love the development business. I really did. And I think if I'd stuck with it, I wouldn't have sort of suffered that real estate debacle because I was in office and I couldn't pay attention to the business. But I found that, I was pretty active raising money for candidates. I was early supporter of John McCain's, was part of his sort of core group in the very beginning. And I love that aspect of it, but I never really thought about running. And then Barry Goldwater had a famous meeting up at his house after John Rhodes. You remember John?
I do. I love John Rhodes.
Yeah,
and his son, Jay.
Yeah. And what happened was the Rose Mofford it went to the state Supreme Court whether Rose Mofford was the governor or not, and John Rhodes was running against her. And Anyway, the court ruled that Mofford was the governor, and the Rhodes campaign for governor ended, and I was involved in that. And we were up in Barry's house, and with all the sort of the young Turks that were around Rhodes, including me, and Goldwater says, "Well, somebody in this room, representing a new generation, needs to run next time for the governorship of Arizona. It just somebody in this room." And we're all nodding our head, and I'm looking up, and they're all looking at me. and Barry's looking at me, and I said, "Barry, I couldn't get elected dog catcher. I'm a real estate developer." And he said, "No." He said, "No, you could." He says, "I'd share your campaign, and you can do it. You're what we need," and all this stuff. So that's what started it.
I'll be darned.
Yeah.
So you get into office. Your management style in office. Tell me about that.
Well, I guess I have a very simplistic approach to management, which is I just went out and hired the brightest people I could find that didn't necessarily agree with me on any particular subject, but that had, I felt, personal integrity when it came to believing what they believed and that could articulate their views. So I hired the very best people I could. They were a lot smarter than I was, and I put together a team of people that were really experts in their policy areas. And
one of the areas I was impressed with in your campaign was your discussion of creating a plan. You created a plan up front.
Yeah, well, and that was the plan. And basically we used that plan. That was our guidepost for both the first and second term. And,
look, plan on issues.
Yeah, it's called the Symington Plan. That's what it was very detailed. And the interesting thing is that after about 6 years, most of that plan, most of the things that I'd set out to do, we accomplished. So it was worth having a plan. So I guess I'm a planner. Well, you know that as a developer, that there's a lot of planning and coordination of experts. You don't know it all yourself. If you're going to build a project like the Esplanade, you've got all kinds of experts that, you know, their knowledge makes you feel quite small if you by comparison. But your job is to manage that enterprise, and that's what a governor essentially has to do. You got to have a plan. You got to have really great people, great teams that you can delegate, and you just have to have a very good compass.
What was the key in terms of your appointments after you became governor? Did you have any that were mistakes, and did you?
Oh yeah, I made my share. Of. Some of them were very unfortunate mistakes, but usually that was the result of just not being thorough enough. You know, and it's hard to be thorough in every instance when you're the governor, because it's like being an emergency room physician. Well, you know that as mayor. I mean, it's just can be chaotic.
Yeah, you know, being mayor is a lot easier than being governor. I love being mayor. It was fun. But you get a city manager, and the city manager is professional, and they're putting in place department heads, and the department heads don't change all the time, so there's lots of institutional knowledge.
Yeah, but you've got the city council you got to deal with.
Yeah, you do have the city council.
You got a complicated.
But you had 90 members of the legislature. So, and I had friends in the legislature, including guys like Art Hamilton, who were Democrats.
I loved Art.
That's what I was about to say. I think Art cared a lot about you. He felt like you reached out to him all the time on issues, as opposed to just running him over on things.
Yeah. No, I still to this day, I truly admire him. You know, you talk about a guy with a great spirit, big heart. Yeah, Art's a very special human being.
Yeah, Art, for those who don't know who are watching, is an African-American leader in Arizona, an outstanding orator. He was just wonderful when he would give his speech, and he could be booming when he came into a room if he disagreed with you.
Well, I don't know if he ever told you the first time he came into the cabinet room and I was governor. I was brand new, and I'm sitting in my chair, and he was representing the Democratic caucus, and they come in, they sit down around the cabinet room table, and we were having a good political discussion and airing differences of points of view, and I wasn't budging on, I forget what the subject was. I mean, and all of a sudden, Art, without any forewarning or anything, just stood up. All the Democrats stood up, and they just walked out on me. And I'm sitting there at the end of the cabinet table, and
welcome to politics.
And I kind of looking around at my staff saying, what just happened, you know? And it was very, I learned early that things can be pretty rough.
Yeah.
But then I put them off balance, because I just come out of nowhere. I'd go leave my office and go down to the Capitol and walk into the Speaker's office, or walk into Pete Rios was president of the Senate, and I'd just walk into Pete's office unannounced, you know, which was very untypical of being the governor, right?
Yeah, and it definitely not only throws them off, but then all of a sudden they have to have a real discussion. Yeah, I have found in life and politics that if you can get a real discussion going, the ability to find common ground definitely starts to avail itself.
Yeah. You remember Ann Richards?
I do.
She loved you.
Yeah.
Former governor of Texas.
She did.
Big Democrat, absolutely. And she and I became great friends. And she told me a story, and I don't know whether it's true or not, but she said that she ran into you at a party and put you up against the wall and said, Fife Symington, I know he's the governor, and I know he's a Republican, and you're thinking about running against him.
All true.
And don't you do it. Is that right? Did she really do that? That's one of the classic.
She cornered me. She literally cornered me, and I'm like, okay, I will consider this. I think I have to go.
Oh, isn't that wonderful? I've always wanted to ask you the question whether that was true, because she called me up just chortling about it and says, I want you to know, Fife.
Well, you know, she's a powerhouse, obviously, in the Democratic Party. She had that great line that something along the lines that with Fred Astaire, where women have to dance backwards in heels. She gave that at one of the Democratic National Convention speeches. I think people really loved her at the time, but she kind of tricked me. She said, come here, I want to talk to you about what you're going to do in the governor's race. And so she puts her hand on my back, and then we walk into the corner. And then she had me cornered where I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't talk to anyone else.
Well, she had that great Southern drawl, you know. She'd drag it out. Yeah.
Okay, I want to get back to this name.
Yeah.
So with this name, there's this sense from people that you're blue blood and you've never had any problems ever in your life. Right? That's just the sense that you were just gifted from the beginning. I want to know your darkest hour. Have you ever had one?
Oh, I've had a few. Yeah. I mean, just like you, I'm sure you've had your ups and downs in business.
Absolutely.
I had the vicissitudes of life when it comes to business, and but I think that probably the worst moment of my life was when I had to resign my office as governor, because I knew what had happened. It was not a fair process, but the state and the office is more important than the individual. So I resigned to save the state all the junk that goes along with
Okay,
that.
so
And that was very traumatic, to go from being the governor to basically being temporarily a felon in one day losing all. I mean, it was just unbelievable.
okay, so on that story,
Yeah.
uh, I was mayor at the time. Here's where I admired you. That isn't easy. That's not easy, to be under criminal indictment and at the same time be governor and keep moving the agenda forward. And you were not only moving it forward, but I was watching polling at the time. You were keeping your polling numbers up.
Yeah.
How did you manage that stress and the more than inconvenience, that what would be debilitating to most people? How were you able to manage both of those at the same time the way that you did?
Well, it may be the Scottish blood in me, sort of very rebellious by nature, that I wasn't going to sit and take it.
No,
And,
you didn't.
Yeah, and I didn't. But what I did was I got my staff together and I said, look, you all didn't sign on for this, but I'm in. I'm all in with you. We've got to carry on, get our jobs done. The people expect it. We've been doing a good job. Let's just keep doing a good job, and we'll treat this other thing that's going on totally separately, and I'll keep it totally separate from the office, which I did, and so it took a bit of mental discipline on my part to sort of shut a lot of the opinion out, not read the papers and stuff like that. And so I worked to protect my emotional health by making sure my staff kept me abreast of the things that were important to running the state, and the legal stuff I kept totally separate. And
Would you put that under like fake it till you make it? I mean, is that what you're doing? Just ignoring it? Or because you didn't look,
No.
I've got pictures of you and I going out and announcing the ball team. I was looking at it yesterday, you and I and Jerry Colangelo, when we announced the ball team, and you were kind of in the middle of all that.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have known you were under any stress at all. I know that you were, but how did you manage that stress?
Well, I had it in perspective. First of all, I knew I was either going to win or I was going to lose. I was convinced I would win ultimately, and that I hadn't done anything wrong. And so I just held my head high. And my dad sort of taught me that lesson, that I learned it on the football field too. I'm sure you grew up in competitive sports, and I was a good football player. And I remember my coach, Reddy Finney, great man. If you got clipped and knocked down, don't cry about it. Stand up, shake it off, go play ball. That's what life's all about. Get back in the game. So I'm competitive by nature, and I called from that competitive well, and it did serve me. It did serve me well. No question about it.
Yeah, and there's no doubt in politics. I know this: if you have any flaw, any fault, anything going wrong, your political opponents will turn the heat up on that in any way that they can, by looking for other allegations, by looking for other problems, by filing charges, anything that they can do. That doesn't mean that sometimes charges aren't right and that are criminally charged by people on the outside. It just means that political opponents will exacerbate it. They'll make it bigger.
Yeah, you're foolish to get into politics and be hiding anything. You just have to put it all out there. But they came at me from a direction which I found hard to believe. I still find it hard to believe. And looking at it, a dispute over values of buildings on a financial statement, pick a value in a real estate depression where, what's something worth. But
that is important to point out, especially I think for the audience. It is very difficult to figure out what the value is of a property when you put it on a financial. correct? I mean,
Yeah.
you could put the cash basis. You could say, well, here's what I paid
Or
for
replacement cost.
it. Or replacement cost.
Or maybe what you think it's worth. You know?
Or
I mean,
what the brokers think that it's worth.
Yeah, that's right.
And then that changes.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
weekly sometimes. Right now in today's market,
Yeah.
values are changing dramatically.
Yeah, look at cars. How many ways do you value a car? It's an interesting. I think there's a real danger that in white collar crime issues that they're coming close to basically making it a crime to lose money. It's in its simplest form, which is a real danger. In my case, I always thought I'd at least hang the jury. I always thought there'd be some people on the jury who would complete, and in fact, we did hang the jury, but I never expected the federal judge to unhang the jury, and that's why I won in the end, was because he violated my constitutional rights to a fair trial.
And so during this process, two things stood out to me. One was, I would have thought that you would have been distracted. It seemed like you were stepping on the gas from a political standpoint. You were putting more issues out during that period of time than you were beforehand. At least it would seem so to me. Do you think that was correct?
Yeah, we made the decision to go on total offense. You know this from your public service. The worst thing that can happen to you is be permanently on the defensive. You can't get anything done. People won't respect you. It's a difficult operating environment. But if you're leading and you're on offense, people will pay attention. You'll garner more momentum, and you'll get more done. And I was determined to make the best of however many years I had left in the position of governor. I was determined to wring every good thing out of it that I could for the people of Arizona. So that was basically a conscious decision on our part. And I say our because I had a great team.
Yeah,
some of my.
I had Chuck on our show.
Oh, did you?
And I love to make fun of him because I'm said,
glad you
didn't
survived.
have any other job other than beating me up. That was the only reason Fife hired you was to beat me up. And he goes, well, I had to do that every now and then. He goes, but I did that for sport. I had another job I had to do. So that's question one. Now, here's something I'd like to maybe hear from you. Advice to other business people before that kind of problem happens or during that problem. What did you learn from it? What could you tell other business people that maybe they could learn something from it? Any lessons?
Well, I think most people who are in business aren't aware of the laws that are sort of surrounding the business environment and how easy it is to transgress and not realize that you've transgressed. For instance, if you fill out a personal financial statement that it's just you, not using an accountant or anything else like that, and you make an error, some kind of error on that financial statement, under the law says that if the mistake had the capacity to influence the financial institution, that's a crime. It didn't have to influence. It could have had absolutely no bearing whatsoever on the deal, which was my case, because I was never the financial partner. But if it had the capacity to influence, it's a crime. You think about that. You can cast a wide net with language like that. So I think if you're in business and you're thinking about going into politics, you want to make sure that you really understand the laws that you've been operating under, and that you don't have a problem, because the minute you jump into the public arena, you put a great big bullseye on your back.
There's a great book called Wise Men. I don't know if you ever read it, but it's about the 5 young people who they all went to Groton, which was the thing that kind of pulled them together. Maybe it was Groton and Exeter. But these were people all at the top of their game during the Roosevelt administration. They worked in the stock market. They worked in other areas, McCloy, Atchison, others. And at the end of the book, these individuals made huge contributions by being secretaries of defense and secretaries of states. The comment that was given by all of them that I found to be interesting is that in today's environment, they wouldn't be able to do it. They wouldn't have been able to have been involved in the stock market or to have been engaged in business and at the same time been involved in politics. Do you think that's a loss? Do you think that's a problem for us? Do you think that's something that...
I think so. I think that we're making it increasingly difficult to run for public office because if you follow the cycle, and we're about to enter another one here, you'll notice that all the attacks are violation of the campaign finance rules that nobody understands, but you violated them. And it's always the headline in the Republic. Somebody has violated the campaign finance
the
law
easy
here.
tactic as an opponent is just to file a claim against someone for violating the campaign finance law.
So we've that's why I was always a champion, as you may remember, to deregulate the whole campaign finance thing, because we're creating a minefield for candidates, and people get into trouble that don't deserve it and shouldn't have to. It's basically interfering in the free market, is the way I always put it. So. Yeah, it's. I think that we've created quite a minefield for people who want to run for public office.
And that was something. There are areas that we've disagreed. I disagreed on campaign finance. I did some things on trying to change the rules, but I do agree that we've created the system that's more about other politicians filing claims than people truly violating them. And so we end up spending all of our time talking about what happened on the campaign finance and very little talking about the issue of what are the real issues. Now, for me, the biggest issue that needs to happen when it comes to money is disclosure, just to know who it is that's giving money.
Right. Well, I've come around to your point of view.
Okay.
Especially on dark money. Remember, I even joined up
You're
with
on the
Terry
team?
Goddard.
Yeah.
Terry and I
That's why
actually
I brought
shook
it up.
hands. It was probably the only time in our life we changed. We shook hands. So, but dark money is definitely a huge problem.
Yeah.
It's just a huge problem.
I like Alito's comment, which is that the whole idea of people being afraid to put their name next to the money that they're putting into politics is not reminiscent of the home of the brave. We have to make certain that we know where money's coming from.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a question I have about that whole incident before we leave it. So the shocking part, I mean the thing that everyone was shocked about, I don't know if you were or were not, was that Bill Clinton pardoned you. What happened?
Well, it's in the book, and Bill Clinton wrote the foreword in the book that I just gave you a copy of.
I saw that.
Yeah, and he really wrote that.
What's the name of the book again?
It's called Old Money, New West.
Old Money, New West.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And Jack August, the guy who wrote it, is one of the great historians of Arizona. So
of course,
I know it's going to be written well.
Yeah, well, Jack passed away about a quarter of the way through the book, and then Bob Nelson took over and finished the work, and we've honored Jack's legacy by making him the co-author, and he deserved that. He did a lot of the oral interviews. I think it's like 6 years in the works. It was quite something. So it's, and I would say, an authorized biography. It's not an autobiography, so it doesn't slobber all over me and make me some sort of demigod. It's a good yarn.
Yeah, Jack wouldn't do it unless it was his portion. I know he wouldn't do it unless it was historically accurate. It's just who he was.
Yeah, it's very accurate.
Okay,
but anyway,
so what happens? Bill Clinton pardons you.
Well, Bill and I share a joint best friend, Tommy Kaplan in Baltimore, who's a novelist. And Tommy was my roommate in high school and was Bill Clinton's roommate at Georgetown when they were undergraduates. And I was at Harvard when they were at Georgetown. And we goofed around in Hyannisport some weekends, and that's how I got to know Bill. And what happened was there was a riptide, and the red flags were up, and Bill got in the ocean, and he shouldn't have, and he got caught in the riptide, and the riptide took him out quite a ways offshore, and I ended up in a rowboat that was just happened to be with the oarlocks in it down the beach, and I went out about 400 yards offshore and intercepted him, and he'd been raked over the coals and was bloodied shirt.
From the reef?
Yeah, from the reef initially. And he had shoulder-length hair, and I remember grabbing him by his mop and lifting him up and saying, "You need a ride?" And I flipped him in the rowboat, okay? So anyway, it wasn't any big deal. I mean, I just did what any normal human being would do, right? So you roll forward, and we're at the Seattle National Governors Conference, and Chelsea and my daughter Whitney got together, and Chelsea spent the night in our suite. And so Bill and Hillary showed up the next morning to collect them and everything. And Bill had never met Anne. And so he gave her a big embrace. He says, "Has Fife ever told you the story about how he saved my life?" And I never thought of it in those terms, but that's what he thought. So she said, no, I'd never heard that story. So anyway, so that sort of had a ripple effect, because when we got back to Phoenix, Paul Harvey did the rest of the story on national radio about two governors who had this event happen, and years ago, and so here I am, a Republican governor. Clinton's running for president, and I saved his life. Okay, well, you can imagine the heat that I took from the fellow Republicans.
Yeah, today they definitely wouldn't forgive you.
Yeah. So anyway, when I was going through all my legal difficulties and stuff, Clinton took an interest in it, not because of the incident, but because he thought it was very unfair. He was at war with his own Justice Department.
Did you know he was going to do it?
At the end, towards the final part of the process, he had turned to Tommy and said that he would entertain, the pardon.
Uh-huh.
And so it went directly to the White House. It didn't go through the Justice Department.
Had you filed an application for one, or did it?
It all happened. We put it all together in a matter of like 4 or 5 days,
Uh-huh.
and it went directly to the Secretary of the Oval Office, and it sat on the president's desk, and was released when he left office. Didn't know whether it was going to happen or not, but it was a wonderful thing he did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
He explains it in the foreword. He's very, very objective about what laying it out there.
Yeah, I actually had a chance to talk to him years ago about, and asked him from the opposite side. And that was exactly the comment that he made to me. He didn't make the comment about you saving his life. He just made the comment of, I thought that was totally unfair. I thought what was happening to him was unfair.
Yeah.
So-
Very decent. Always respected him.
I love the story you told me once about you and your dad meeting him and him coming over to your table. You want to share that story?
That was we were in New York City,
Uh-huh.
and I'm with my sister Helen Clay and my dad and my dad's friend Natalie, and I get a call from Tommy Kaplan, and Tommy says, "You know who wants to have lunch?" And we'd already scheduled to have lunch at this Italian restaurant off of Central Park, and it caught me totally off base. I says, well, okay, we'll just expand the table by 2. He says, yeah, you don't mention any names, because those guys get really upset about it, but you know who, and he'll arrive, blah blah blah. So we go into this restaurant and we sit down, and the table is set, and there are 2 empty chairs, one for Tommy and one for you know who. And and so my father keeps calling the maitre d' over.
Now, your dad's very conservative, right?
Yeah, my dad's just ultra conservative, and so is my sister Helen Clay, my eldest sister. And so my father keeps telling the maitre d', get rid of those 2 empty places there. They're just us for dinner. And I said, Dad, just relax. He could be very imperious, by the way.
Uh-huh.
And it just, we were expecting some guests and stuff. And then about 5 minutes later, the president walks in with this phalanx of people and Tommy and stuff like that. And Dad looks up, and Helen Clay looks up, and the waiters, who up to that point had basically, how New York waiters can be, they can dish you and treat you like an inferior species, right? All of a sudden, they just falling all over themselves. As the president walks up, gives me a big hug. Fife, it's good to see you, and Mr. President, it's great to see you. I'd like to introduce you to my father. My father was absolutely stunned. He had no idea that it was going to be Clinton, and nor my sister Helen Clay.
Uh-huh.
So we had a wonderful lunch, and everybody in the restaurant, of course, is looking over at us.
So what'd your dad think when he was done?
Well, Dad said, before we break up, Mr. President, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, what you did for my son. I'm very thankful to you. Thank you very much. And so it was a very cordial moment. And he said, well, what they did to your son was very unfair, and I'm glad I set the record straight. So it was,
I've never seen an individual who could do what he does in terms of charming people, entertaining people.
Well, you have a lot of the same qualities.
Oh, well, he had that photographic memory too. I mean, he could remember things.
Yeah.
I remember going through with him the list of mayors in a room that we were going to walk into that had over 300 mayors in it. Mm-hmm. And when we went into the room, literally he had studied this book of their names, and then I had given him this what were going to be the main points that the mayors would care about. And he goes up to give his speech, and on the way up, he shakes every mayor's hand, mentions them by name, talks about their city, and if he had a story with them, he gave it to him. It took him an hour and a half to get to the front of the room.
Yeah.
I was stunned.
Yeah.
Then he starts giving his speech. And when he gives his speech, you remember Barry Starr, my chief of staff years ago?
Yeah.
I said, Barry, look at this. I had 9 pages, and this is before email, so I just gave it to him at the time. He went through it in order, mentioning, CDBG funds and ICE-T funds, and then having the story about when he was governor of Georgia, what that meant. It was just unbelievable in his ability to be able to pull that off.
Well, the really fun part about this was when we jumped back in the limo after lunch, we all said our goodbyes. On the way out, the editor-in-chief of Knopf, or Knopf, the publishing house, stood up, was at a distant table, came over. He was an Asian Indian. And said, Mr. President, you owe me a book. He was 6 months behind on his autobiography. So this guy confronted him right in front of all of us. It was really very funny. So we pile in the car, and my sister Helen Clay turns to me and she says, oh my gosh, I now know why he was elected president twice.
Yeah, no doubt.
And Helen Clay's a tough sell.
Yeah, I had the 5 big city mayors. I used to go sit down with them all the time, and we'd talk about big issues that were going on at Dinkins, Daley, Bradley, and of course me, and I'm 29 years old at the time, so I'm just kind of sitting there listening to these guys tell their great stories. I remember once Bradley was talking about the riot that had just happened, and then Dinkins talked about some snowstorm that had knocked him out, and Daley talked about the bottom of Chicago being flooded. Finally, they turned to me and they said, so what's the big issue in Phoenix right now, Mayor? And I said, thought about it for a second. I said, oh man, those golf greens, if you don't get them just perfect, people go nuts out there. He goes, you're not a real mayor. But when we had to present to Bill Clinton, we'd done this presentation. Everybody had their part. It was supposed to be, I think, Dinkins first and then me. So I go to stand up to give my piece. And when I go to stand up to give my piece, Daley shoots up and he says, yeah, Mr. President, we got something to say. Now, he was mad that the president hadn't appointed his brother to Secretary of Transportation or something along that line. And he just starts chewing out the president. I mean, he says, let me tell you one damn thing, Mr. President, blah, blah, blah. If you do this, we're going to do that. And then he hits me in the arm and he says, Daley says, I'm speaking for the group here, am I not, Johnson? And I go, Mr. President, he's not speaking for me.
Good for you. Good for you.
But Bill was able to laugh and to just listen to him and to look like it was important to him. And then Bill started speaking after he had gone through this tirade against the president. He charmed every one of them.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just amazing to watch.
Truly, probably the most gifted politician of our generation.
I think I agree with that.
Yeah, really amazing. And Gore was interesting.
Did you know Al?
Well, our chief rival, when I went to Gilman in Baltimore High School, and our chief rival was what's it called in Washington, D.C., St. Albans. And Gore went to St. Albans. And I was an over the center defensive linebacker on my team. I played right over the center. So my job was to hit the center in the head as hard as I could, just on every play, right? Well, guess who the center of the St. Albans football team was? It was Al Gore.
Oh, my gosh.
And we had this championship game, which we won. And Gary Goodman, I don't know if you know Gary, lives here, has a water company, I think. And so Goodman had obviously telegraphed to Gore. So I'm in the Oval Office with President Clinton, and we're trying to figure out where the support for NAFTA is. And we were going through the list. You
were a supporter of NAFTA.
Yeah. And
so was I.
And all of a sudden, this big hand grabs me and twirls me around, and it's Vice President Gore, and he says, "So you're Symington. You knocked me in the head in that football game. I'll never forget it."
So you saved one and you crashed into the other.
I said, well, Mr. Vice President, I didn't really mean to hurt you.
All right. So if you were giving advice, give me 2 pieces of advice. First one, to people who are going into politics today, what would your advice be?
Thoroughly vet yourself, everything that you've ever done in your life. Make sure you completely understand that terrain, because you will be attacked, and you have to be unsparing in the analysis of yourself, your life, everything you've done, because if you got a skeleton in the closet, it will not remain in the closet.
Okay. Advice to your children, what would it be?
be optimistic about the future, no matter how difficult the times are in the current space. Be optimistic about the future, and you'll go far. Never, and just, never give in. Never give in to the bad stuff. There's always opportunity out there, and if you get short-sighted and pessimistic, you'll be blind to those opportunities. So maintain a spirit of optimism.
All right. And then in terms of your own life, are you still optimistic about where you are today?
I'm very optimistic.
That's
yes,
awesome.
I am. Yeah, I feel very blessed to be where I am, and I feel equally blessed to have made a friendship with you.
I feel the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah, to me, I always try to end the show with talking about beacons. And there are some beacons that are takeaways for me, and part of why I asked you to be here today. One of them is that it's important, especially in politics, but I think it's important in everyday life, to always question yourself, to put yourself into a position where you think about the assumptions that you have, and you question them, and you listen to other people. The idea that you know everything, the idea that you've landed and there's no ability to learn any further, that means you've stopped growing. I felt like I grew a lot by getting to know you. The audience doesn't know, but you and I do a ski trip on an annual basis.
Yeah.
We've built up a friendship. And I have loved not only listening to your stories, but listening to your point of view and trying to understand it. It's helped me shape many of the opinions that I have. The second big beacon that I would say is, goodness gracious, don't let politics get in the way of losing the gifts that other people have to give you.
Yeah.
Politics, we fight about it, we argue about it, and people are fighting and arguing about it more today than ever. They're fighting as much as the candidates themselves oftentimes.
Yeah.
And oftentimes by doing that, they're losing their relationships with their children or their parents or with their friends. They're losing those gifts. Being able to participate with people who don't think exactly like you, it is a gift. It makes your life richer.
Yeah.
I've loved being able to do that with you. I appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you,
I just
Paul.
want to thank you.
Thank you.
I'm looking at a book that you have there in front of you. What's that?
Well, it's my gift to you, and the book is called Old Money, New West, and it's got a picture of me. I think I've changed a little bit over the years. That's probably more like me in the back, but it's a biography that's by Jack August and Robert Nelson of my life, and I'm giving you a copy of it, and I hope you enjoy it. You're in, by the way, you're in it.
Oh, I'm sorry. So Jack August, as we spoke about earlier, was a good friend of ours, and again, this picture looks like your son. So it's forwarded by Bill Clinton.
It is.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he took a personal interest in the book, which was great.
And so why Old Money, New West? What's the idea to that title?
Well, it's just that like you brought up the name J. Fife Symington III, kind of blue blood, East Coast buzz, the Frick family, that type of thing. That was the shtick.
Yeah. And by the way, the opposite of what I've learned in being your friend.
Well,
it's not a blue blood. It's someone who has a very good ability to relate to people. As I said, I've enjoyed my friendship with you.
Yeah, and I've enjoyed mine with you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
This is Paul Johnson, Fife Symington. We're here with the Optimistic American. Thanks for joining us this evening. And if you get a chance, Old Money, New West by Jack August and Robert Nelson, you can buy it on Amazon, I think.
That's right, Amazon.
Thank you.